the day my grandmother left me her entire estate. My brother slammed both fists on the lawyer's desk so hard the room went silent. Before I tell you what happened next, if this story hits close to home, please like and subscribe to Hidden Karma Stories. I read every single comment, and drop one below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing all the different places you all are coming from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My brother Derek was 3 years older than me, and he spent most of our childhood making sure I never forgot it. Boys were smarter, he said, boys were stronger. Boys mattered more, and the sooner I accepted that, the easier my life would be. He wasn't just repeating things he made up on his own. He was echoing what our parents modeled every single day. Our dad laughed when Derek said it. Our mom called it just boys being boys and told me not to take it so hard. I took it hard every single time. Derek got the bigger bedroom in our house in Columbus, Ohio. He got a brand new bike when mine was held together with duct tape. When he turned 16, there was a shiny used Chevy in the driveway with a bow on it. When I turned 16, my parents told me I'd marry someone who would buy me a car someday, so there was no need to rush. I stopped arguing early. I started working instead. I got my first job at 15 bussing tables at a diner 2 miles from our house. I opened a savings account and deposited every paycheck. When college came, I applied for every scholarship I could find because my parents told me they could only afford to help one child, and Derek needed it more. I got into Ohio State on a near-full academic scholarship. I graduated with honors. I took a job in accounting and built something real. Derek lasted 18 months at community college, failed most of his classes, and spent the next several years bouncing between warehouse shifts and construction gigs he never stuck with. None of that changed how my parents saw him. He was still the golden child. He was still the son. My grandmother, my mom's mother, Grandma Ruth, saw it all differently. She lived outside Savannah, Georgia, in a white farmhouse she'd kept spotless for 40 years. She was sharp and warm and full of opinions she wasn't afraid to speak. She told my mom more than once that raising a child to believe he deserved everything because of his gender was not love. It was damage. My mom didn't want to hear it. But Grandma Ruth heard me. She called every Sunday evening like clockwork. She drove 8 hours to Columbus for my college graduation when my parents said it was too far. She showed up at my first apartment with a casserole dish and a hug that lasted a full minute. She told me she saw herself in me when she was young, before life narrowed down her options. She said she wanted to be for me what nobody had ever been for her. When Grandma Ruth got sick 2 years ago, a slow, cruel decline that started with her lungs, I drove to Savannah every weekend. 5 hours each way. I cooked her meals, cleaned her bathrooms, sat next to her on the couch while she watched old black and white movies and told me stories about people I'd never met. Derek visited twice in over a year. Both times he left with less than he came for because both times he asked Grandma Ruth for money. Both times she told him no. She told him he needed to learn to build something instead of waiting for someone to hand it to him. He didn't like that answer. The second time he didn't call her for 4 months afterward. I was holding her hand on a Thursday morning in March when she took her last breath. Derek showed up to the funeral late and spent most of the service scrolling through his phone near the back row. 2 weeks after we buried her, we sat in the office of her attorney, a man named Gerald Webb, in downtown Savannah. Dark wood furniture, a ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, my parents on one side of me, Derek on the other, all of us waiting. Gerald went through the standard portions first, some jewelry left to my mom, an antique rocking chair to a cousin in Tennessee who'd always loved it, a small donation to the local animal rescue where Grandma Ruth had volunteered for 12 years. Then he got to the main assets. Her farmhouse, valued around $320,000, a savings account with just over $190,000, an investment portfolio worth roughly $160,000, all of it, every dollar, every square foot, every account had been left to me. Derek stared at Gerald like he'd spoken in a foreign language. He asked him to repeat it. Gerald did. Derek asked if there'd been some kind of clerical error. Gerald said no. Then Derek pushed forward out of his chair and put both hands flat on Gerald's desk, hard enough that the pen holder tipped sideways. He demanded to see the document himself. Gerald slid the will across the desk without flinching. Derek grabbed it and read. His lips moved, his hands trembled. My mom made a sound like she was trying not to cry and then gave up trying. My dad's face went from its regular color to a deep, furious red in under 30 seconds. I sat completely still with my hands wrapped around the armrests of my chair. The air conditioning hummed. The room felt half the size it had been when we walked in. Derek read the will twice, then he started a third time. When he finally looked up at me, his voice came out like gravel. He said I'd poisoned her. He said I spent all that time with her just to turn her against him, feeding her lies, making her believe he didn't love her. My dad jumped in before I could even inhale. He said there was no way Mom would have done this unless someone manipulated her. He said I must have filled her head with stories. Gerald cleared his throat calmly. He explained that Grandma Ruth had been fully competent, that he had met with her on 6 separate occasions over the past 2 years to discuss her estate plan, that her instructions were deliberate and clearly documented. He turned to a specific page and read aloud her note stating that Derek would receive exactly what he had earned through his relationship with her, and that figure was 0. My mom reached across and grabbed my arm. Her voice broke open. She said family was supposed to take care of each other. She said I couldn't just keep everything when Derek was struggling. She said I needed to do the right thing. Something moved through me when she said that. A flash of memory. Being 7 years old and asking why Derek got the new bike when mine had a broken chain. Being 16 and asking why Derek got a car. Being 19 and asking why I had to figure out college alone. Family takes care of each other. I stood up, picked up my bag, and said I needed time to process this. My mom started to say something else. Derek shouted after me that I was stealing his birthright. Gerald called my name. I walked out the door and didn't stop until I was in the parking lot with the Georgia heat pressing down on me. The drive home to my apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina took 5 hours. My phone buzzed non-stop from the moment I pulled onto the highway. I checked it at a stoplight and saw my mom's name, my dad's name, my mom again. I put it face down in the cup holder and turned the music up loud. When I finally parked outside my building, I sat in the car in the dark and checked my voicemail. One message from Derek. His voice was controlled and deliberate in a way that sounded rehearsed. He said we needed to handle this situation like adults before it destroyed the family. He said he wanted to talk it through. I deleted it and went inside. He was blaming me for a fire his entire upbringing helped set. I called my best friend Cassandra and asked if she could come over. She showed up 40 minutes later with 2 bottles of red wine and no questions until we were both sitting on my couch with full glasses in hand. I told her everything. From Grandma Ruth's last days to the reading, Derek's explosion, the drive home, the missed calls. Cassandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, she swirled her wine and asked me one thing. What would your grandmother want you to do with this gift? I opened my mouth, then closed it, then sat with the question for a long moment. Grandma Ruth hadn't just left me money, she had left me proof that I mattered, that I was seen, that someone in my family looked at me and thought she deserved something good. I called Gerald Webb first thing Monday morning from my kitchen table. My coffee went cold while we talked. I asked him about next steps. I asked whether Derek had any real legal grounds for a challenge. Gerald was direct. Anyone could file a challenge, but Grandma Ruth's estate planning was ironclad. She had documentation of her mental competency signed by her doctor. She had written statements explaining every decision she made. The legal process might cause delays and stress, but the challenge would not succeed. He gave me the name of a financial advisor, a woman named Patricia Cole, and told me to call her soon about the tax implications and investment strategy. I wrote her number on the back of an envelope because I couldn't find a notepad. My mom called while I was getting dressed for work. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered. She told me I was destroying the family. She told me I was being greedy when my brother needed help. She asked how I could live with myself. I asked her what exactly Derek needed help with. She said he had around $35,000 in credit card debt and had been counting on this money to start over. Something tightened in my chest. I thought about what Grandma Ruth wrote to Gerald, that she refused to enable his problems, that she wouldn't hand money to someone who hadn't learned to be responsible with what they already had. My mom kept talking about family and obligation and doing the right thing, but I wasn't really hearing her anymore. That evening, my dad called. His tone was the one he used when he wanted me to feel like a child. He told me Derek had responsibilities as the man of the family that I didn't understand. He said the farmhouse should go to Derek because he'd need a home when he got married and started a family. He said I'd end up marrying someone who would take care of me anyway, so I didn't really need it. I sat on my couch holding the phone and listening to my father, a man who had watched me work through college, build a career, and run my own finances for years, explain why my brother deserved my inheritance. And something settled into place in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. My dad would never see me as Derek's equal, not ever, not in any version of the future that existed for him. Patricia Cole's office was in uptown Charlotte, 12th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows. She shook my hand and offered me water before we even sat down. She had spreadsheets ready and explained everything without once making me feel like I needed a man in the room to understand. She walked me through the farmhouse. It needed roof repairs and one bathroom update, nothing catastrophic. The investment portfolio was mostly low-cost index funds and treasury bonds that Grandma Ruth had been adding to steadily for over 2 decades. They needed rebalancing to better match my age and goals. The savings account would cover property taxes and create a serious emergency fund. We spent 2.5 hours on paperwork. Patricia treated every question I asked like a reasonable adult question. She didn't simplify unnecessarily or pause to check whether I was following. After a lifetime of my parents acting like money was something men managed and women just benefited from, sitting across from Patricia felt almost radical. Derek showed up at my apartment door on a Saturday morning without calling. I was still in pajamas, holding a mug when the knocking started, hard and fast. I looked through the peephole and saw him in the hallway, hands in his pockets, face deliberately calm. That calm scared me more than the shouting in Georgia. I opened the door but didn't invite him in, leaving it wide open in case I needed an exit. He sat on my couch and ran both hands through his hair and started with an apology for the scene at the lawyer's office. He said he was blindsided. He said he always believed Grandma Ruth loved them equally, and it didn't make sense. Then he pivoted. He talked about family sticking together. He talked about how money wasn't worth destroying a relationship over. He suggested we sell the farmhouse, split everything down the middle, move forward like adults, because that was what fair siblings did. He said Grandma Ruth probably hadn't thought through how much damage this would cause, and we could fix her mistake ourselves. I sat in the armchair across from him and kept my voice steady. I asked him whether he thought fair parents would have treated us the same growing up. His face went blank for a moment. He said that was different, that was in the past. I asked him how it was different. He said our parents did the best they could with limited resources. He said they had to make choices. I reminded him that those choices had always come out in his favor. While I worked a restaurant job at 15 to afford things they gave him freely. He waved his hand like I was pulling out irrelevant old receipts. He said I needed to stop holding onto grudges and be mature. I felt my jaw tighten. I told him I wasn't making any decisions about the inheritance right now. I needed more time. The calm cracked. He leaned forward on his elbows and told me I was being deliberately difficult. He said I got scholarships, so I didn't actually struggle like he did. He said he deserved support from the family. I sat there and felt something close to amazement. He struggled through 2 years of classes he barely attended, while going to parties every weekend. I worked full-time and kept a 3.9 GPA for 4 straight years. He actually believed those experiences were equivalent. He actually believed dropping out earned him more sympathy than graduating with honors. I stood up and told him to leave. He shot up fast enough that the couch moved. His face turned red. He said I would regret this. He said I was choosing money over family. He said our parents would never forgive what I was doing. He grabbed the door handle, turned back one last time, and told me his lawyer would be contacting me about contesting the will. Then he slammed the door hard enough to shake the wall. I locked it and leaned against it with my hands trembling. Not from fear, from anger at him for assuming I'd crumble because he showed up and asked nicely, and from anger at myself for the small piece of me that still felt guilty about saying no. I spent that whole weekend going through the estate documents Gerald had given me. Bank statements, property records, tax forms, insurance policies, everything labeled and organized in file folders with Grandma Ruth's careful handwriting on every tab. At the bottom of the last folder, I found a sealed envelope with my name written on the front. I recognized her handwriting immediately. My hands shook opening it. The letter was 4 pages long on her good cream-colored stationery. She started by saying she loved me, and she was sorry she wouldn't be there when I read this. She wrote that she watched my parents favor Derek from the beginning, that it broke her heart to see me work so hard for a kind of approval that was never going to come. She said she tried to talk to my mom about it. My mom didn't want to hear it. She said she knew I spent my childhood feeling less than. She said this inheritance was her way of saying out loud what she'd believed my whole life, that I was always worthy, that I was always loved, that I always deserved good things, no matter what my parents decided about gender. I sat on my couch and cried for a solid hour. I cried for her. I cried for the little girl who got a restaurant job at 15 because her parents wouldn't buy her a bike that actually worked. I cried for the college student who took out loans while her brother got family money handed over without question. She wrote that she hoped this inheritance would give me the freedom to build whatever life I wanted without waiting for someone else to fund it. She wrote that she was proud of the woman I'd become despite my parents' limitations, and that those limitations were never, ever my fault. Her words felt like arms around me from somewhere I couldn't see. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I would keep it for the rest of my life. On Monday, I used a personal day and drove down to Savannah to see the farmhouse for the first time as the person who owned it. It looked exactly as I remembered, cream-colored siding with green shutters, rose bushes along the front porch, a wind chime by the door she'd had for as long as I could remember. I was sitting in my car in the driveway when a woman came out of the house next door, older, small, moving carefully but with purpose. She was carrying a foil-covered plate. She introduced herself as Mrs. Alina Park. She said she'd lived next door to Grandma Ruth for nearly 25 years. She said she was glad everything went to me. She said I was the only one who ever came and stayed and actually sat with her. She said Derek had come by twice in the past year asking for money, and both times he'd left angry when she said no. She handed me the plate oatmeal cookies and patted my arm and said Grandma Ruth made the right choice. Then she went back home and I went inside. The house smelled like her hand lotion and old paperback novels. Everything was neat. Her presence was in every corner. I went through her desk in the spare bedroom and found bills, photos, old birthday cards, and then I found a leather journal with her name stamped on the cover. I opened it and started reading. She wrote about my childhood. She wrote about calling my mom to talk about the favoritism and my mom brushing it off every time. She wrote about refusing to give Derek money when he came asking. She wrote about me visiting every weekend during her illness. She wrote about being proud of my job and my apartment and the life I was quietly building. I kept turning pages. She documented Derek asking for $12,000 to cover gambling debts. She wrote about telling him to get help. She wrote about him going silent for months afterward. She wrote that she wouldn't enable his choices because she loved him too much to make his problems worse. That sentence stopped me. I sat on the floor of her spare bedroom and read it twice. She didn't leave him nothing out of spite. She left him nothing because she understood that bailing him out would only delay his reckoning, not prevent it. My phone rang, my mom's name on the screen. I answered. She demanded to know what I was doing at Grandma's house without telling the family. Her voice was sharp and accusatory. I told her calmly that I was the estate executor and had every legal right to be there, that I needed to secure the property and review the assets. She said it was disrespectful to go through Grandma Ruth's things without Derek present. I reminded her Derek had visited twice in 18 months. She said that didn't matter, he was still family. I told her I'd call her later. I hung up. I kept going through the journals. There were more, going back over a decade. She'd written about my high school graduation. She wrote that my parents left the ceremony early to go to a party Derek was throwing at his dorm. She wrote about the look on my face when I realized they were gone. She wrote about sitting through my whole speech alone in the third row and feeling furious on my behalf. I read entries about my college graduation. She wrote about my parents telling her the drive to Columbus was too long. She wrote about showing up anyway by herself and crying when I walked across the stage. She wrote about every Sunday phone call. She wrote about how little my parents mentioned me when they talked to her, how it was always Derek's news, Derek's drama, Derek's needs. She documented 15 years of being the only person in my family who was paying attention. I locked the journals back in her desk and left the house. My hands were steadier than they'd been in weeks. 3 days later at work, I got a call from Patricia. She needed my signature on a stack of documents to formally transfer the assets into my name. We scheduled a Wednesday afternoon meeting. Before we hung up, she said something that stayed with me. She said I didn't owe anyone an explanation for my financial decisions. The money was mine legally and ethically, and what I did with it was entirely my call. Her words felt like permission to stop justifying myself to people who'd never accept the answer. The thick legal envelope arrived the following Monday addressed to Gerald. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. I called Gerald and brought it to his office unopened during my lunch break. He read through it and set it down on his desk. His expression stayed composed, but something shifted in his jaw. He told me Derek had hired an attorney named Raymond Drake. They were formally contesting the will on grounds of undue influence, claiming I had manipulated Grandma Ruth during her illness to turn her against Derek. Gerald said this was a pressure tactic. It was designed to scare me into settling to make the stress go away. He told me the challenge had no legal footing given the documentation of Grandma Ruth's mental capacity, her detailed reasoning, and the years of estate planning meetings on record. He told me not to engage directly with Derek or Raymond Drake. Everything would go through him from now on. My stomach knotted anyway. That evening, both my parents called together on speaker. My dad used his serious voice to tell me we could avoid court if I agreed to a fair split now. My mom joined in, saying legal fees would eat up the estate and I should be smart about this. I asked them again why they never thought I deserved equal treatment growing up. My mom said that wasn't relevant to what was happening now. Those 5 words told me everything about where we were. I told them I was following Grandma Ruth's legally stated wishes. If Derek wanted to waste money on a lawsuit he couldn't win, that was his choice to make. My dad's voice got louder. He said after everything they'd done for me, this was how I repaid them. I asked with a steadiness that surprised me what exactly I was supposed to be grateful for. They paid for Derek's college. They gave him a car. They spent my entire childhood putting his needs above mine every single time. What did I owe them for that? My mom started crying. My dad said I wasn't welcome at family gatherings until I fixed the mess I'd created. The call ended with her voice breaking in the background. I sat on my couch staring at my phone. They were blaming me for a fire they built over 30 years, and somehow in their version, I was the one holding the match. I called Cassandra. She came over with Thai takeout. She listened to everything and told me their rejection was about their own inability to face what they'd built, that it wasn't a verdict on my worth. She was right, it still hurt. I met with Dr. Melinda Shaw at her office in South Charlotte the following Friday. A friend recommended her after I mentioned that I couldn't stop swinging between guilt and grief, and something I couldn't quite name. Melinda's office had soft light and comfortable chairs, and enough quiet to actually think. She asked me what brought me in. I told her about the inheritance, the family conflict, the guilt I felt about having so much when Derek had so little. Melinda listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something that shifted everything. She said I was grieving multiple losses at once. Grandma Ruth, the family I thought I had, the hope that my parents would one day see me the way they saw Derek. She said the inheritance wasn't just money, it was proof that at least one person in my family had always seen my real value. Tears ran down my face before I even registered that I was crying. Gerald called the following Tuesday. Raymond Drake had filed the official will contest in probate court. The process could take several months. Gerald told me to expect my family to increase their pressure as they realized the legal route wasn't going to get them anywhere quickly. He recommended I document any threats or harassment. That seemed extreme. Until the voicemail started. Derek left one, then another. By the 4th he was shouting that I'd stolen from him and I would regret it. I saved every single one and forwarded them to Gerald. My cousin Rachel called that Wednesday. She'd inherited Grandma Ruth's antique dining set and had reached out to say she wanted to apologize for my parents' behavior. She said she'd watched the favoritism play out at family gatherings my whole childhood and never said anything. She wished she had. She said several other relatives quietly agreed that my parents and Derek were being unreasonable, but were too uncomfortable with conflict to say so out loud. It mattered more than she knew. I drove back to the farmhouse the following Saturday to keep going through Grandma Ruth's belongings. In the hall closet I found a cardboard box filled with envelopes, letters and cards in my handwriting going back 15 years, birthday cards from college, thank you notes for Christmas gifts, postcards from the one international trip I'd taken on a work bonus, letters about my first apartment, my first real promotion, a difficult breakup I'd needed to talk through. She kept everything I sent. I dug through the whole box and found exactly 6 items from Derek, all birthday cards. None of them had more than his name signed at the bottom. I was putting the box back when the front door opened. Derek walked in like he still belonged there. He said he had as much right to go through her things as anyone. I told him clearly that the property was legally mine and he needed to leave. He walked past me toward the bedroom and started opening her dresser drawers. He picked up her gold watch from the jewelry dish on top of the dresser. I told him to put it down. Grandma Ruth had specifically named that watch in the will as mine. He put it in his jacket pocket. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line. Derek's face went red. He started shouting that I had no right to do this. I stood near the front door and waited. The officers arrived within 20 minutes. I showed them the will and Gerald's contact information. One officer read through the relevant pages, while the other stood between Derek and me. The first officer told Derek plainly that the property belonged to me, and he needed to leave immediately or face trespassing charges. Derek argued that the house should belong to the whole family. The officer said the will was clear and he needed to go. Derek shoved past me on his way out, shoulder-checking me hard, and yelled that I'd stolen his inheritance and he was going to sue me for emotional distress. Then he was gone. The door didn't quite close on its own, and I stood in the living room listening to the quiet rush back in. One of the officers stayed with me for a few minutes and asked if Derek had shown up unannounced before. I said no. He recommended I change the locks immediately and consider a protective order if it continued. He said inheritance disputes within families could turn dangerous fast, and I shouldn't underestimate that. I hadn't thought about needing protection from my own brother. That realization sat heavy. The locksmith came that afternoon and replaced all 3 exterior locks. He also installed a security camera above the front door that connected to an app on my phone. The whole thing cost just under $500, worth every cent. Mrs. Park from next door came over while the locksmith was working. When I explained what happened, she shook her head slowly and said she'd keep an eye on the property. She said Grandma Ruth talked about me constantly. She said she was glad the house went to someone who actually showed up. Her words tightened my throat. Driving home that evening, I started seeing Derek differently. Not as a hot-tempered person having a bad reaction. As someone who had never once in his life been made to face a real consequence. My parents had shielded him from accountability so completely that when the world finally held the line on his behavior, he genuinely didn't understand how to respond except with rage. Nathan called old habit. Gerald called a few days later with more information about Derek's financial situation. The legal filings from Raymond Drake had revealed details. Derek wasn't $35,000 in debt the way my mom described. He was $62,000 in debt. Credit cards, a personal loan, and back rent from an apartment he'd been evicted from the previous spring. Raymond was arguing that Grandma Ruth hadn't been thinking clearly, because no reasonable person would fail to help a grandchild in such obvious distress. Gerald told me this actually helped our position, because there was documentation in Grandma Ruth's own journals and in her communications with Gerald that she knew about Derek's financial problems. He had asked her for help with those exact debts. She had declined and explained her reasoning in writing. She didn't fail to help him out of ignorance. She chose not to because she understood it wouldn't actually help him. Gerald said the challenge was effectively doomed, but Drake was probably extending it to collect more in fees. He told me to sit tight and let him work. I went back to the farmhouse the following weekend to keep sorting through Grandma Ruth's things. In the closet of her bedroom, I found a file box labeled estate planning with a strip of masking tape. Inside were copies of letters between her and Gerald going back nearly 4 years. She had documented 6 separate instances of Derek asking her for money. $5,000 for credit cards, $8,000 for what she called his gambling problem, $19,000 for rent and a car payment. Each time she refused, she wrote Gerald a letter explaining why. She kept copies of the text messages Derek sent requesting money. She kept handwritten logs of their phone calls with dates and summaries. The woman was meticulous. No judge reviewing this evidence would conclude she was confused or manipulated. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she built the paper trail to prove it. My next appointment with Melinda came at a good time. I brought my mom's email. She'd sent a long message accusing me of poisoning Grandma Ruth's mind, calling me greedy, saying a good daughter would have put family harmony first, and read parts of it aloud in the session. Melinda asked what I thought when I read it. I said it was full of lies, but it still strung. She asked why I felt guilty about Derek's financial problems. I said he was my brother, and there was part of me that felt like I should do something. She asked whether giving Derek money would actually help him. I thought about that for a long moment. I said probably not, based on everything I knew about his history. Every time someone handed him something, it just delayed the next crisis without changing anything underneath it. Melinda said Derek's situation was the result of years of choices and years of being protected from consequences. She said giving him a financial rescue wouldn't address any of the actual problems. She asked what Grandma Ruth would want me to do. I said she would want me to honor her wishes, and to not undo the lesson she was trying to leave for Derek, that actions have real outcomes. Melinda said I was starting to understand something important. Honoring Grandma Ruth meant accepting her wisdom, not just her money. I left that session lighter than I'd felt in weeks. I took a week off work and went down to Savannah to properly clear out the farmhouse. Being in her space still felt like being near her. I could almost hear her voice in the kitchen, in the hallway, in the small sound the back door made when it swung shut. I started in the living room with her bookshelves. History, gardening, southern cooking, a few mystery novels she'd loved. I boxed what I wanted to keep and marked the rest for donation. In the bedroom, I went through her closet. Most of her clothes would go to a women's shelter. I kept 2 cardigans that still smelled like her perfume. At the bottom of her dress's deep bottom drawer, I found photo albums. I sat on the edge of her bed and opened the first one. Almost every page was me. Me in the hospital the day I was born, me at my first birthday, me in a Halloween costume, me starting kindergarten, me at my first piano recital, me in middle school holding up a ribbon from a science fair, me at high school graduation, me moving into my college dorm room with a second-hand bookshelf. Every photo had a note in her handwriting on the back, the date, what I was accomplishing, what she was proud of. 5 albums total. I found maybe 15 pictures of Derek across all of them. Most were from when we were very small, none had notes. She didn't document what Derek was doing because Derek didn't give her much to document. The physical evidence of our relationship sat right there in my hands, in a drawer she kept near her bed. I hired an appraiser named Calvin Morse to assess the property the following Thursday. He walked through every room with a notepad, checked the foundation and the plumbing, and went up into the attic. He said the house was in solid shape. The roof would need work in the next 3 or 4 years, but nothing needed to happen immediately. He estimated the property would sell in the current Savannah market for around $310,000. Or I could rent it for approximately $1,800 a month, which would more than cover taxes, insurance, and general maintenance. He asked what I was thinking. I said I wasn't ready to sell, not yet, the house was where she loved me, selling felt too final. Calvin nodded and said renting was a good middle option. He recommended a property management company that specialized in working with out-of-town owners. They'd handle tenant screening, maintenance requests, rent collection. I'd just get a monthly deposit and updates. I set up the meeting, signed the contract the following week and drove home. The farmhouse was now a rental property. It was still mine. That was what mattered. Gerald called me on a Monday in late spring with the news I'd been waiting for. The probate court dismissed Derek's will contest. The judge had reviewed Grandma Ruth's medical records confirming her mental competency, her written estate planning documents, Gerald's notes from 6 meetings over 2 years, and her personal journals detailing her reasoning. Her intentions were clear and unambiguous and deliberately constructed. There were no grounds to overturn them. Derek could appeal. Gerald told me plainly that no appeals court would touch this. The foundation was too solid. I was driving home when the call came in. I pulled into a gas station parking lot to finish listening without crashing. When we hung up, I sat there for a few minutes with the windows down and the Carolina air coming through. It was over. That night, a voicemail from my dad appeared in my phone. He said the judge was wrong. He said the system had failed to see the truth. He said I should still do the right thing and share with Derek regardless of what any court decided. He said Grandma Ruth would be ashamed of me. I played it once, deleted it, blocked his number. My dad genuinely could not understand why Grandma Ruth made the choice she made. He couldn't see the decades his own parenting had shaped. He couldn't acknowledge that maybe the woman who raised his wife, who watched our family up close for 30 years, had better information than he did about who had shown up and who hadn't. An hour later, text messages from Derek started flooding in, one right after another. He stole from him, he would regret it. Karma, names I won't repeat. And then a line that made me screenshot everything immediately, "You'll pay for what you did." I forwarded every screenshot to Gerald with a note. He called me back in under 15 minutes. He said he was sending everything to Raymond Drake with a formal warning. If Derek continued, we'd move for a restraining order. He asked if I felt safe. I said I wasn't sure. The messages stopped after Gerald contacted Drake. I checked my phone compulsively for days. Nothing came. I met with Melinda the following week and sat down in that chair and said I was fine. Then said actually I wasn't fine. Then started talking and couldn't stop. I told her about the dismissed contest and the relief I felt. I told her about the voicemail from my dad and the texts from Derek. I told her about the sadness underneath all the relief, the grief of accepting that my parents would never, ever see me the way Grandma Ruth did. I said something I had never said out loud to anyone. I said I had spent my whole life waiting for my parents to love me the same way they loved Derek, and this situation had finally made me accept that it was never going to happen. Melinda leaned forward and asked what it felt like to say that out loud. I said it hurt. I said it felt like saying goodbye to something I'd been holding onto for 30 years. She said I was grieving the parents I deserved, the ones I never got. She said their limitations were real and they were not my fault and they were not my responsibility to fix. She asked what Grandma Ruth would want for me now. I said she would want me to stop waiting for approval that was never coming, to build a life that didn't depend on it. Melinda said I was beginning to understand. Patricia and I met again to finalize the investment rebalancing. She spread charts across her desk showing projections under different strategies. She explained how the passive income from the portfolio could supplement my salary in ways that would change how I thought about everything, not just money, but risk, opportunity, security. She asked about my work. I said I liked accounting and was good at it. She said to keep doing it then. She said having a financial cushion changes your posture. You can take chances you'd never take when one missed paycheck would mean real trouble. She asked what my relationship with money had been before all of this. I said anxiety. I said I had always worried because I learned young that no one was going to catch me if I fell. Patricia nodded and said that made complete sense given everything I'd described. She said the inheritance wasn't just money, it was the end of that particular fear. We spent 2 hours on paperwork, and when I left her office, I had a clear roadmap and a new sense of what I actually owned. 2 more weeks passed before an envelope arrived from Derek's attorney, not about the inheritance this time. A demand letter. Derek was claiming I owed him $50,000 in emotional distress damages caused by the inheritance situation, his pain and suffering, his psychological harm. The letter gave me 30 days to respond before they filed a civil lawsuit. I forwarded it to Gerald immediately. He called that evening, and even his measured voice carried a note of disbelief. He said the claim had no legal basis. Emotional distress required proof of intentional wrongdoing. Honoring a legal will I didn't write didn't qualify. He said his response would be swift and clear, and if they pursued further frivolous action, it would be characterized as harassment. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was past scared. I was mostly just tired of watching my family refuse to accept that they had any role in how this turned out. The months that followed found a quieter rhythm. I went to work. I met with Patricia every quarter. I paid property taxes from the rental income. I sat across from Melinda every 2 weeks and kept doing the work of letting go. My parents and Derek stopped contacting me directly. Rachel called occasionally with updates from family gatherings. She said they complained about me to anyone who'd listen. She said most of the extended family changed the subject. I asked if that bothered her. She said no because she knew what actually happened. I started accepting that I might never have a real relationship with my parents or brother again. That thought visited me sometimes late at night, quiet and heavy, but it also arrived with something unexpected underneath it, a kind of relief. I stopped hoping they would change. I stopped rehearsing conversations where they finally admitted what they'd done. I just lived, and let them live theirs. The grief was real, so was the peace. I used some of the inheritance to book a trip to Italy in early spring. Grandma Ruth had always wanted to go. She had books about the Uffizi, about Roman ruins, about cooking traditions in Tuscany. She talked about it sometimes like a dream she'd put off too long. I packed a small container of her ashes in my carry-on. I flew into Rome and spent a week walking through the Forum and the Pantheon and the narrow streets of Trastevere. I scattered some of her ashes in a quiet corner of the Palatine Hill at golden hour. I took a train to Florence and spent 4 days in museums looking at paintings she'd have stood in front of for an hour each. I scattered more of her at the edge of the Arno at sunset, near a spot where she would have pulled out a notebook and written down everything she was seeing. I felt her the whole trip, not in a way I can explain easily, just present, like she was finally getting to see what she'd always imagined. I bought postcards and wrote to Mrs. Park and to Rachel. I ate pasta in small restaurants where nobody recognized me and drank local wine and walked until my feet refused to continue. I came home tired and grateful and more settled than I'd been in years. Back home I threw myself into work differently than before. The financial security had quietly changed my posture in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't afraid of losing my position. That confidence apparently showed. My manager called me into his office about 3 months after I returned from Italy. He told me I was being promoted to senior accountant, a meaningful salary increase. He said I'd proven myself consistently and my recent work had been exceptional. He asked what changed. I said I'd just gotten more confident lately. He said it was obvious and congratulated me. I negotiated more vacation time, 2 remote days a week. I asked for both, knowing I was willing to walk away if they said no. I got both. My manager commented afterward that I seemed different, more reassured, more settled in myself. I smiled and told him I was just finally learning to value my own work the way it deserved. I started volunteering at the Women's Financial Independence Network about 4 months after the Italy trip. The organization ran free financial literacy workshops for women building their own economic foundation. Women coming out of divorce, young women trying to avoid the mistakes they watched their mothers make, women who'd been in relationships where a partner controlled all the money and they'd had no say. I filled out the application, explaining my background in accounting and my interest in helping women build the skills I'd had to teach myself. The director called me 2 days later. She said they desperately needed volunteers who understood both the practical mechanics of money and the emotional weight women carry when they've spent their whole lives being told finance was someone else's department. I started the following Tuesday with a budgeting class, 8 women ranging from early 20s to mid-50s. Some had never managed their own bank account. Some had credit card debt they were ashamed of. Some had managed large households but had no idea what their own retirement looked like because their husbands had always handled it. I showed them how to track expenses, prioritize bills, build an emergency fund from almost nothing. I told them about working at 15 because nobody was going to hand me a car or pay for my education. I told them some of what I learned came the hard way, but it was learnable. They asked questions, they told their own stories. Several thanked me afterward in a way that caught me off guard. I drove home that first night more satisfied than I'd been at my actual job in a long time. Cassandra and I drove down to Savannah on a Saturday in late October. The rental family had been in the farmhouse for 6 months, and I wanted to check on the property and visit the grave. We stopped for coffee an hour out and drove the last stretch listening to a podcast about investment strategies for women in their 30s, which made Cassandra laugh because I had apparently become the person I once would have found intimidating. I pulled up to the farmhouse and saw a bicycle in the yard, curtains in the windows, a welcome mat on the front porch. The property manager said they were wonderful tenants, paid on time, kept everything tidy, had already planted a small vegetable garden in the back. I felt glad the house was home again for someone that was right. We drove past my old elementary school and the public library where I'd spent so many afternoons and the diner where I'd bussed tables at 15. Cassandra asked questions and I answered them, pointing out landmarks and attaching memories. Some good, most complicated. We ended at the cemetery on the edge of town. I brought yellow roses because those were her favorite. I stood at the grave for a long time telling her everything. The promotion, Italy, the volunteer work, the rental income. The way my life felt different now, not easier exactly but wider, like I had more room to move in it. I told her about cutting off my parents, about learning to be okay with that loss, about finally stopping the wait for approval I'd spent 30 years reaching toward. Cassandra stood back a respectful distance, but I could feel her there. I felt Grandma Ruth there too, not in a way that required explanation, just present, the way love stays in a person long after the person is gone. My cousin Rachel invited me to her daughter Lily's 8th birthday party in November. She told me my parents would be there, and she understood completely if I didn't want to come. She also said several relatives had specifically mentioned they wanted to see me and thought my parents had handled everything wrong. I thought about it for 2 days. I decided I wasn't going to disappear from every family event forever because my parents couldn't handle their own choices. I bought Lily a chemistry kit she'd mentioned wanting and drove to Rachel's house on a Saturday afternoon. I walked in with the wrapped present, and immediately 3 cousins I hadn't seen since the funeral came over to hug me. An aunt pulled me aside within minutes to say she was glad I came. She said my mom had been telling anyone who'd listen that I manipulated Grandma Ruth and stolen Derek's future. She said most people weren't buying it because they remembered who had actually shown up all those years. An uncle told me quietly that he always thought my parents were too hard on me and too easy on Derek, and he was proud of what I'd built on my own. Another cousin said Grandma Ruth's will was her business, and she knew exactly what she was doing. I stood there holding a glass of sparkling cider, feeling overwhelmed by something I hadn't expected, being seen, by people I'd barely thought of as my family. Lily loved the chemistry kit. She tore open the box before anyone could stop her. My parents were in the kitchen. They did not come to speak to me. I did not go to speak to them. We existed in the same house for 3 hours without acknowledging each other directly. That felt like progress. An older aunt found me near the end of the party and pulled me quietly into the hallway. She looked nervous. She said she had something she should have said years ago. She apologized for not speaking up when we were kids. She said she watched how differently my parents treated Derek and me at every gathering, and it bothered her every time. She said she stayed quiet because she didn't want the conflict and she'd regretted it ever since. She said she was sorry, and she hoped I knew I deserved every single thing Grandma Ruth left me. It surprised me more than almost anything else that had happened. I told her I understood why she hadn't said anything. I told her it meant something to hear it now. She asked if we could have lunch sometime and get to know each other as adults. I said yes. I drove home realizing I could build my own version of a family from the pieces worth keeping, instead of accepting the whole thing as a package deal or walking away from all of it. The letter from Derek's attorney arrived on a Tuesday in December. He was withdrawing all legal challenges to Grandma Ruth's will. No further action would be taken. The letter was brief, formal, offered no explanation. I called Gerald immediately. He said he wasn't surprised. Derek's case had never had real merit. His attorney had probably advised him months ago that he was paying legal fees to fight a case he had essentially no chance of winning. Gerald suspected he'd either run out of money or finally accepted reality, and both outcomes amounted to the same thing. The legal threat was over, completely and permanently over. Derek could not take this from me. My parents could not guilt it out of my hands. It was mine legally, ethically, permanently, and I could finally stop waiting for the next attack. I paid off my car loan in January. $11,000, transferred from the inheritance account in about 4 minutes. 2 weeks later I paid off my student loans, nearly $22,000 I'd been chipping away at since graduating. I logged into both accounts afterward and looked at the zero balances for a long time. No debt, no monthly payments eating into every paycheck. No interest growing quietly in the background while I tried to get ahead. I owned my car. My education was fully paid for. My credit cards had always been paid monthly because I'd learned young that I couldn't afford to carry a balance. Now I had savings, investments, rental income, a good salary, and no obligations pulling money backward. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just surviving, I was genuinely, structurally secure. I thought about Derek, 62,000 in debt, evicted, waiting for someone to rescue him the way someone always had. I thought about how differently our lives had turned out, not because I was lucky, but because of the choices we each made and the lessons we each took from our childhood. I worked because I had to. He waited because he'd been taught someone would come through. Grandma Ruth saw that difference clearly. Her will wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an honest acknowledgement of who we each had become. I had my final regular session with Melinda just before Christmas. We had been meeting every 2 weeks for 8 months. She said I had done the work. I'd processed the grief over losing Grandma Ruth. I'd worked through the complicated feelings about the inheritance. I'd faced the loss of the relationship I'd always wanted with my parents and stopped waiting for it to become something it was never going to be. I'd built real confidence in my own value that wasn't dependent on their approval. She said I could call her anytime I needed a session, but she thought I was ready to move forward without regular appointments. She said she was proud of how I handled this. She said a lot of people in my position would have given in to the guilt or the family pressure, but I held to what I knew was right. And I did it while grieving and while being attacked from multiple directions at once. I thanked her, I meant it. I called my alma State University in January to ask about setting up a scholarship fund. The development office connected me with a woman in their donor relations department, and I explained what I wanted. A scholarship for women studying accounting or finance who were working their way through school the way I had. Named after Grandma Ruth, because this was her idea made visible. Funded with $50,000 from the inheritance to support multiple recipients over many years. The woman on the phone was genuinely excited. She said this was exactly the kind of scholarship they needed, and she'd send paperwork right away. 2 weeks later, I signed the documents and transferred the money. The scholarship would award $5,000 annually beginning the following fall. The university asked if I'd be willing to speak at the spring awards ceremony and meet the first recipient. I said yes without hesitating. I wanted to tell her about Grandma Ruth. I wanted her to know why this existed. I wanted her to feel what I wished I'd felt at her age, that someone saw her potential and decided it was worth investing in. 1 year after Grandma Ruth's death, I looked at my life and it was almost unrecognizable. Financial security I'd never imagined for myself. Meaningful work, both my career and the teaching. Real friendships built on honesty. Professional relationships with people like Patricia and Gerald who treated me with respect from the first meeting. A version of family I'd chosen from the people worth keeping. I had stopped waiting for my parents to love me the same way they loved Derek. The inheritance wasn't just about the money, though the money changed everything in practical terms. It was about proof that I mattered, proof that someone who watched our family closely over decades thought I was worth something. Grandma Ruth's gift gave me permission to believe I deserved good things without needing anyone's approval to confirm it. I was thriving, in ways I never let myself imagine when I was the overlooked daughter working restaurant shifts to pay for textbooks, while my brother got everything handed to him. I visited Grandma Ruth's grave on the first anniversary of her passing in the spring. I brought yellow roses and stood there for a long time. I told her about the scholarship, and the young woman named Maya who would receive the first award, a girl working 2 jobs to keep her GPA above a 3.8, writing in her essay about watching her mom struggle, and deciding she would never be financially dependent on someone else's choices. I told her about the promotion and the confidence that came from not being afraid of losing my job, because everything depended on it. I told her about Italy, and scattering her ashes in Florence near a bridge she'd always wanted to see. I told her about cutting off my parents and learning to be okay with that grief. I thanked her for seeing me when they couldn't, for loving me when they made me feel small, for having the courage to write a will that reflected what she actually believed instead of giving in to pressure and splitting everything to keep the peace. Her final act of love freed me from a lifetime of feeling like I needed to earn my place. I was finally living, Not surviving, not proving, just living fully and with my whole self. I promised her I would honor what she gave me by continuing to help other women build the same thing, and by never, ever accepting less than I deserved again. A few months later, I met him at one of my volunteer sessions. His name was Marcus, and he helped coordinate the financial literacy program. He noticed me working with a group on budgeting strategies and came over after class to ask how I structured the session. We talked for 2 hours. He celebrated my work promotion when I mentioned it. He was curious about my life in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. He had never known the version of me who worked 3 jobs and sought approval from people who couldn't give it. He only knew the version who had figured herself out. When I told him about my family situation, he was quietly amazed. He couldn't understand parents who treated children differently based on gender, as if that were a normal framework. His perspective helped me see how far I'd actually come, not as distance from a painful place, but as growth into something real. We took things slowly, but I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. 2 years after receiving the inheritance, I stopped and took stock. Financial security that gave me freedom to make choices rather than survive them. A thriving career. Relationships with people who valued me for who I was. A scholarship fund making real differences in real lives. Volunteer work that felt like purpose. Marcus, and the beginning of something I didn't have a word for yet. Family I had chosen, Rachel, the aunt who apologized in the hallway, a handful of cousins who saw clearly what others refused to. Grandma Ruth gave me more than money. She gave me the knowledge that I had always been worth something and the resources to act like it. I visit her grave a few times a year and tell her about my life. Every time I thank her for seeing me, for loving me the way I deserve to be loved, for having the courage to tell the truth in her will, in her journals, in that 4-page letter on cream-colored stationery, even when telling the truth was going to hurt the people she also loved. Her final gift was freedom. I carry it forward every day. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever had someone in your life who believed in you when your own family couldn't? I read every single comment. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to Hidden Karma Stories. It means more than you know.